And welcome, Hoosier fans, to this week's edition of Assembly Call Radio. This is episode number 30 of Assembly Call Radio, and it is our 322nd episode overall of the Assembly Call, recorded on the evening of Thursday, June 8th, 2017. I am Jared Morris, your host for Assembly Call Radio, where each week, health willing, we break down the most important IU basketball stories from the past 7 days. My apologies again for having to cancel last week's show at the last minute, but I'm back and better than ever and raring to go tonight. Now, remember, once the season starts, you can catch us immediately after every IU basketball game on the Assembly Call IU postgame show. Watch us live at assemblycall.com, and you can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Just go to assemblycall.com/YouTube, and that will redirect you to our YouTube channel page. And if you can't catch one of our shows live, you can always catch up with our podcast. Just search for Assembly Call wherever you listen to podcasts, and you will find us. All right. Well, let's begin how we always begin, and that is with our Hoosier Proud banner moment. And my banner moment for this week comes from a quote said by Archie Miller at the Huber's Winery event last week. And here's the quote. He said a lot of really interesting things, and we're going to get into some of them in today's show. But this is the one that really stuck out to me. We have a chance to build a contender every single year. I mean, what could give you more confidence as a fan than a coach who doesn't shy away from expectations and who appears to have the plan and the fortitude to actually bring it to fruition? You know, I have no doubt that the 2017-18 season, the one coming up, is going to have its ups and downs as the players get used to Archie and as Archie gets used to the players. And as, you know, I'm sure we'll also see a few recruits that we all really want choose other schools. It's inevitable. It's going to be a process. So the 2017-18 season may not be the banner season, but it sure does feel like it will be a season that helps lay the foundation for a banner to come. And that's what has made this offseason such a fun one to experience and to cover. All right. Well, now let me introduce my esteemed co-host. Yes, just one co-host this week. Andy Bottoms is off, still staring at his television set in disbelief after a Cincinnati Red hit 4 home runs in one game. But here with me, holding down the fort in this two-man extravaganza, is a man who is not on Ohio State's short list of coaching candidates, although he might end up on it the way things are going. He's a writer for The Big Lead and someone who is pretty sure he could sub in for Kyle Korver in the NBA Finals without anyone noticing. He is Ryan Phillips. Ryan, please kick us off with a rant against anyone saying Archie Miller would have taken the Ohio State job over the Indiana job, which I will remind everyone would have involved replacing his fired mentor in the process.
Yeah, I think that's actually – I'm going to talk that, Mata. I think that was going to be my rant anyway. But, yeah, I mean, there were some people out there, and Jeff Goodman of ESPN was one of them, who called me out for you know, I pretty much said that these people saying that he would have taken the Ohio State job over the Indiana job were wrong. And we're 100% wrong. And I think that there's an issue there because Archie did like the Ohio State job. People had often mentioned that and connected him to that job. But when he liked the Ohio State job, the Indiana job wasn't open. I mean, and the Indiana job is a demonstrably better job than Ohio State. If you look at things like attendance figures and things like that, Ohio State is wallowing down at 60% attendance in their arena on a nightly basis, whereas Indiana is Indiana. And yeah, I think that what it reminded me of was Charlie Strong had told pretty much everybody who would listen while he was at Louisville the only job he would leave Louisville for was Florida. And then the Texas job came calling. Well, when a better job comes calling, obviously you're going to take it. So I think that's the situation that Archie would have found himself in if both were available. I still believe he makes the same choice. Again, as Jared mentioned, he would have been replacing his mentor. And from what it sounds like, Thad Matta was kind of pushed out the door. It does not feel like this was a guy resigning because of his health issues. It feels like he was shoved out, and it feels like he maybe could have done another year and then moved on. And now Ohio State, because they did it the way they did it, they're kind of getting what they deserve because nobody wants to join and nobody wants to sign up. And it feels like a few guys have already turned that job down to stay at their current locations. Greg McDermott among them. It feels like Chris Mack also sort of made it known that he wasn't going anywhere. So you're moving, down that list. And one thing it made me feel better about was the fact that Indiana's coaching search was so private, so quiet, and we just had the guy. You didn't have guys publicly turning the job down. You didn't look desperate moving along. You You just heard about it when Archie got the job. They kept it quiet. They went about their business, and they got a top-level coach.
Andy is actually interviewing for the Ohio State job. That's where he is. That's why he couldn't be here. He's not sure if he'll accept it if they offer, but he is.
Well, he's got a couple grade school girl championships to his name, I believe, or at least like runner-up finishes.
He does. Yes. Alrighty, so we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we move forward on this episode of the Assembly Call. We are, of course, going to talk about the big news from Thursday, which is that the assignments for the ACC Big Ten Challenge were announced, and Duke is coming to Simon Skjodt Assembly Hall, an announcement that I think surprised a lot of people, so we're going to talk about that right off the top here in a few minutes. We're going to react to some of Archie Miller's other comments from the Huber's Winery event. I know that seems like it was forever ago, but we didn't have a show last week, so we want to pick up on some of those comments. You all send in a bunch of questions, so our Twitter Q&A segment is going to be very robust. And then in our final segment, we're going to reflect on the interview that I got to do this week with Victor Oladipo, obviously, which was a name that I'm now able to cross off of my IU interview bucket list. So who else is on that IU interview bucket list? We will talk about that in our final segment. So a jam-packed episode of Assembly Call Radio. Before we talk about Duke and Indiana, which is obviously going to be a huge, huge ticket in Bloomington come this upcoming basketball season. A quick word about this week's sponsor, SeatGeek. Buying tickets.
Nice segue, Jared.
Like that. Well, I mean, it fits perfectly, obviously, because people are going to be looking for tickets to that game. You know what my first thought was when that was announced? Maybe we think about making that our trip up this year. Just
Good
a
work
thought.
for me. I mean, if we could actually find a way in.
I know. So just a thought. I don't know if that'll happen.
Crash, guys. We might have to gate crash.
Yeah, we might. Or we can add the SeatGeek app to our phones and look for tickets on the SeatGeek app, because buying tickets to sports and concerts can be complicated, but there is a better, simpler way to buy with SeatGeek. SeatGeek is the smartest, easiest way to get tickets to live events. With SeatGeek's seamless mobile experience, you can buy and sell tickets in just 2 taps. SeatGeek helps you find the best seats at the best prices, even to highly anticipated events like Indiana Duke, fully guaranteed. There's nothing quite like seeing your favorite team or musician in person, and SeatGeek will get you closer to the action for a great value. I have the SeatGeek app on my phone. It's the easiest way I've found to shop for tickets, and I used it earlier this year to get tickets to see Yogi play here in Dallas. I used it to buy concert tickets for my wife, so I can vouch for it and for SeatGeek from personal experience, and just the way that SeatGeek is designed. It makes your ticket experience easier than it has ever been before. And best of all, Assembly Call listeners get $20 off of your first SeatGeek purchase. So just download the SeatGeek app, enter the promo code ASSEMBLY, ASSEMBLY today. That's promo code ASSEMBLY for $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase. Well, you are listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Jared Morris here with Ryan Phillips. And Ryan, let's talk about the biggest news, which, as I mentioned, is the Big Ten ACC Challenge announcement. Duke is coming back to Simon Skjodt Assembly Hall. And I know that you are very excited to relay what happened the last time Duke came to Simon Skjodt Assembly Hall. It wasn't Simon Skjodt Assembly Hall back then. And you can do that in a moment. But I want to address one comment that I got on Twitter right after this was announced, because obviously, Indiana fans are excited. I think we were kind of wondering, would we be, placed lower, maybe a rematch with Georgia Tech, just because, expectations aren't going to be that high. But I really think this is the absolute best case scenario for Indiana. And someone mentioned, did the whoever determines this, did they treat Indiana unfairly by making them play Duke, with kind of a rebuilding Indiana year and a new coach? And I'm thinking, man, this is the greatest gift that could have been given to Indiana, because it's not going to be very long in Archie Miller's tenure that he's going to be able to basically play a home game without the expectation of winning. And I think Duke will probably be favored in this game, even though it's in Bloomington. And while we all expect to win every game in Simon Skjodt Assembly Hall, it'll be early in the season. There's question marks about this team. It's the first year under Archie. So it's that rare game where you're going to get a crazy, ridiculous home atmosphere and be able to play as an underdog, which I don't think Indiana will be doing for long under Archie Miller. But that is a huge opportunity for him to get a big signature win early in his tenure at IU and really put his stamp on the program with a big W. I think it's an absolute home run for Indiana, and really a game that it's a win-win situation, because even if you lose it, it's still a good team that's obviously not going to hurt your strength of schedule. As long as you play well, you can even walk away from a loss feeling good. But you win, against a team like Duke, and it could really be confidence building for this team, give them a big win for their NCAA tournament resume, and again, allow Archie to put an early stamp on the program. So I think it's a huge home run in pretty much every way for Indiana. And needless to say, I'm excited for that game. And I'm already ready to do the post-game show for that one. But we got a long time to wait. What are your thoughts on Duke coming to town?
I agree with you. I think it's a great opportunity for Indiana. You have a chance at an early signature win if you happen to win, but at the same time, you also have the chance at setting something up, and if you do lose and you compete, you can raise your profile that way. As you said, it'll be early in the tenure. It'll be a chance for these guys to test out their system against a really good opponent. That's going to be the issue, as we've talked about. It's the ability to take his system out of practice and put it into practice on the court. And so I think that it's going to be interesting to see how quickly he can do that, how quickly the team can do that. But again, you test yourself early against a very, a top level opponent. You get to have the crowd on your side. Look, I think this is the worst for Duke because they have to go on the road to Assembly Hall. Whoever has to go to Assembly Hall, ask North Carolina about it last year. They won the national title and lost early in the season at Assembly Hall and to a team that, didn't make the tournament. So I think it's, there's always potential for craziness at Assembly Hall. And so I think it's, if you're Duke, you have to be looking at this and not being too thrilled about it. Just because they know what that atmosphere is going to be. And it's great for the fans. It's great for the program because look, if you win, that's a big signature win. Then you can say, okay, we have a big win. You're probably going to regress a little bit, to the mean and whatever. And while it'll raise expectations, nobody's expecting you to, turn out that kind of win all the time in your first year, but it kind of puts the program on solid footing at that point. So, and it'll be big for recruiting too, of course. So
question for you.
I think that's a big deal.
We've talked a lot about what Indiana will do with its open scholarship. Any chance Marco Killingsworth has like a game of eligibility left and could come play?
I mean, we know he's a Duke assassin, 34 points and however many rebounds.
And one of the loudest moments in Assembly Hall history, according to everyone who was there.
I have been at a lot of big sporting events. I have been to a lot of big games at Assembly Hall. That is the loudest I have ever heard that building or ever heard a sporting event. And it's funny because it's one of those things where I think a lot of people think there's some groupthink with it. It's like, well, the game wasn't even over. It was 8 minutes left or 7 minutes left. That comeback, they made an 11-0 run on number 1 Duke. And I think the factor was that program and those people, those fans have been waiting for 4 years for something to really cheer about. And when they saw that team fighting back against the number 1 team in the country when they weren't expected to and made that big run late and Marco Killingsworth throws down a dunk to take the lead. I've said this repeatedly on this show and I've said it repeatedly elsewhere. It sounded like the roof blew off that building. And I was sitting on the floor covering the game for the IDS, and I can tell you the hair on my arms and my neck and everywhere in my body was standing straight up. I mean, I had never felt that kind of an atmosphere at a sporting event. And it was, I will say this, that game, it was loud before it even tipped off. I mean, I'm sitting there with the 2 guys I was working at the Indiana Daily Student with, and we had to yell into each other's ear to hear each other in warm-ups. And then you couldn't talk to the person next to you. That's how loud it was. It was one of those nights in Assembly Hall where sound is almost like thick and you can almost feel it, and you just can't get through it. And it was a wonderful, awesome night. They lost the game, but that is something I will never forget. That run and Marco's dunk. You can watch it on YouTube, folks, and it is so loud and unbelievable. And I think that it makes it louder. What made it louder than the Kentucky game where everybody just exploded was I think that half the crowd when Christian Watford hit that shot was so shocked they weren't speaking and they weren't yelling. And so instead of having the entire arena screaming at the same time, you would have the people just shocked and stunned. Whereas this was just everybody cheering in the middle of a game and keeping it going. And it was an incredible moment, and hopefully we'll get another one of those this fall.
I could listen to you tell that story every episode, I think. I think it gets better every time.
I love that story, man. I just do. I mean, I was very fortunate to be working for the IDS, sitting on the floor in press row when that happened, because it's something I'll never forget. I mean, it is a great memory that I have of that season. It's a season that didn't end that great for Indiana as Mike Davis resigned and all that stuff. But that's a memory I'll always have. And it's just unbelievable.
It'll be interesting to see how loud it is when Robert Johnson hits the game winner for that game.
Yeah, it really will.
I've been predicting a Robert Johnson game winner for 2 years now. It's going to happen this year. Why not happen against Duke?
I don't think Andy's going to be on that show if Robert Johnson hits a game winner. I think he's going to drive. I think he's going to drive to Bloomington and kiss the man. So,
assuming he's not coaching for Ohio State.
Right. I mean, the offer is going to come any hour now.
Real quick, other matchups in the Big Ten ACC Challenge. You got Louisville at Purdue, Notre Dame at Michigan State, North Carolina against Michigan. So some really interesting, juicy matchups. And obviously we're biased, but I don't think there's anything as interesting as Duke playing at Assembly Hall. It doesn't happen very often, so when it happens, I think that's the biggest game of the challenge. All right,
hey, some of these kids, I will have to say, some of these kids have some payback due to Duke after the disaster in Durham a few years ago.
They sure do.
I'm sure that'll be talked about.
They sure do. Yes, they do. All right. Coming up on the Assembly Call, we discuss a couple of the other big stories from the past week. Archie Miller's comments at the Hoosiers Winery event. Talk a little bit more about the firing of Thad Matta, what that means for Indiana. That's coming up. Stick with us. All right. Excellent. Hey, everybody on YouTube. How's it going? Nice to see you all.
Christian Pulisic with 2 goals for the U.S. That's why I was fist pumping early, by the way.
That guy is like ridiculous, isn't he? I just read an article about him.
He's going to be like a world top 10 player, I think.
Wow.
Like, legitimately, by the time. I mean, he's only 18 and 7 months, and he's already starting for a Champions League team. And
how did he happen? And then obviously, we don't want to delve too much into this, but
Hershey, Pennsylvania, man, grew up there. Was spotted. He was just a prodigy and was spotted by a German team as he was growing up, and went over and played with them. Graduated high school and stuff, and went over and I think he graduated through like a correspondence course or something like that, and then went over to Germany. He's been playing with their youth team for a while, and
wow.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it is one of those things where it's like, the U.S. every once in a while we hear about a soccer player who's going to, be the next big thing and then doesn't work out. And he just is.
He might actually be the guy.
No, he is. Like, I mean, he's already at the point where he's one of the top 3 players in the U.S. and he's 18 and 9 months or something like that.
It's crazy. All right. So this segment, we'll talk about Archie's comments at Huber's.
I honestly, you can guide that discussion because
I'll give you the high level stuff
because I don't. I mean, I read about it when it happened, but I don't.
I'll give you some of the highlights.
Okay.
So I'll lead that off, and then.
Oh, what was our time on that one?
That was 16 minutes. So let's keep this segment short and spend more time on the Twitter segment.
Okay.
In fact, is there even any more about Thad Matta that we really want to get into?
Maybe just say. Maybe we should just talk about how coaching is very much a "what have you done for me lately" thing. I mean, we just do a real quick thing on that. It can take 2 minutes.
Yeah. Okay.
But
and then we'll talked about that.
I talked about that with Kent this week, so it'll be easy for me to bust that out.
All right. Cool.
Just ask me what my thoughts were or something.
I can do that. I may just have you tell the Marco Killingsworth story again.
God,
it's a beautiful story,
it makes me smile to this day. It really does. And I realized we lost that game. It was, but
by 8, I think, right? 75-67.
Yeah, they started calling fouls every time Indiana was on defense. JJ Redick got about 12 ridiculous calls. There was one call, Redick went into the lane and stopped and pulled up, and he stopped, and there was about a foot between him and Earl Monroe, I think it was, or Earl Calloway, and there was about a foot between them, and they called a foul on Monroe for touching his arm when he shot. And Monroe was just or Calloway was just what? Screaming at him.
I wonder if Duke's coach had an influence on that call.
Yeah, I really do. But also Killingsworth, that dunk, I think, was his last point of the game.
Oh, was it really?
I think he might have hit a free throw after that. But yeah, he had 34, and that was his 33rd or something like that. Wow. It's crazy. Because he just tired. He just exhausted. You got to remember, DJ White wasn't on that team because he got hurt.
Yeah.
If they had DJ White, they win that game easily.
Yeah. Okay, let's do the next segment. Where's this? Okay, here we go. You are listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Jared Morris here talking IU hoops with Ryan Phillips. And Ryan, let's talk about the other big story. We obviously didn't get a chance to talk about it last week since we didn't have a show last week, but that was Archie Miller's visit down to Huber's Winery for the annual event. In talking with Alex Bozich about that on Podcast on the Brink this week, he said there were 900 plus people there. It was the most people that he's ever seen packed in to that kind of banquet hall room that they have. And he was kind of painting the picture of of it. I have never actually been to that event, but he said it was, as packed and as enthusiastic as he has seen it. And I thought there were some really interesting comments that Archie made. I talked about one that he made in the banner moment about building a contender every single year. But I really thought that his most interesting comments are when he started going player by player. And he was really focused on the 5 guys who stayed in town because, he gave everybody the option of, spending 3 or 4 weeks at home. A lot of the guys took him up on that. But a few guys decided to stay in town. Juwan Morgan, Deron Davis, Curtis Jones, Robert Johnson, and Colin Hartman all stayed in town. And he really had nothing but good things to say about all those guys, and you wouldn't expect anything else. But I thought a few of the comments were really specific and really interesting. So in particular about Deron Davis, he said he's basically down 16, 17 pounds already. And we know how big of an impact that is going to have on Deron's ability to play more minutes, to stay healthy this year, and to fulfill his potential. So that was really, really encouraging to hear. And then he also said that basically all the weight that Deron is shedding, they're just trying to put it on to Curtis. and that for Archie, he really seems to think that Curtis kind of changing his body and becoming a college basketball player in terms of his build and strength is really going to help him transform his game and allow that natural skill and natural athletic ability that we can all see that is obvious to shine a little bit more. So all I have to say is that my early plan to launch the Curtis Jones fan club was buoyed even more by Archie Miller's comments at Huber's. I'm not ready to officially state that yet, but I am getting closer and closer. And then I thought his comments about Robert Johnson, where he basically said that Robert Johnson is as possessed and focused as any player that he's been around. And I think that's great to hear, in particular with a guy like Robert, because sometimes when a guy, goes through the process of getting NBA feedback and maybe they're thinking about moving on, you come back and maybe you got 1 foot in, 1 foot out. You're not that enthusiastic about it because you were thinking about leaving. But it sounds like Robert really wanted to get the feedback, wanted to get specific information, and has, 2 feet firmly planted in Bloomington, really, really looking toward improving his game as much as he can and making the most of his senior year. And I think in a lot of ways, obviously, Deron Davis's development is going to be huge for Indiana. Juwan Morgan's health is going to be huge. There's a lot of factors that will go into how good Indiana is. But I think in a lot of ways, Indiana's going to go how Robert Johnson goes. And if he's able to be consistent and really provide leadership and scoring and a consistent defensive presence, from his position, I think that's going to be big for Indiana. And so to hear that, Archie did say, Bruiser Flint's working with him on talking more. So obviously we'll see if he can step into that role a little bit more. But I think if he's focused and takes that next step as a player, it'll be really, really important for Indiana. So, there were a lot of interesting comments Archie made, but those were the ones that really stuck out about those players in particular. What stood out for you?
Yeah, I think it's the same kind of pretty much exactly what you said. I think that the Robert Johnson being the most focused guy he's ever been around was really interesting. But I guess that really shouldn't surprise us because we all know Robert is definitely he's not. And I don't mean this in a negative way about him being like an introverted guy, but you feel like there's a passion there that's very contained within him as opposed to being an expressive guy. And so I think that really didn't surprise me very much. I figured Colin Hartman would be on campus also. He's an Indiana guy, and he also, is rehabbing an injury. I figured that much.
Sounds like he's all in too. That was something else.
And that's, I think that for those guys having to go through last season after winning the Big Ten title the year before, that's a huge letdown, and they want to get back there. I think that there's a motivating factor. I'm sure Juwan Morgan feels the same way. And Juwan being on campus is good in my opinion, mainly because he's had injury issues in the past. I think it's best for him to be monitored on campus. His whole workout regimen and everything be monitored on campus, be what figure out what the new regime wants from him. Deron Davis, again, huge that he's losing weight. We talked about his lateral quickness a number of times on the show. It needs to get better, especially if he's going to be playing the kind of minutes he's playing. He needs to be more mobile, be able to do pick and roll type stuff he didn't really do that much as a freshman. And I think that, shedding some pounds and not necessarily shedding weight, but putting on better weight. And he wasn't out of shape. He was a big dude. But I think that it's just getting that leaner muscle on where he can move side to side and move up and down and maybe start to run the floor a little more. All of that is going to be good for him.
There's no shame in putting on a few pounds as a freshman at Indiana. We all did.
Yeah,
it happens.
Come on. I didn't get to spend my freshman year, my full freshman year at Indiana, but I definitely put on some pounds in my first year at Indiana. I think we can say that. But I also want to talk about Curtis Jones, because the idea of putting some weight on him is I think important as well. I think Archie is right there. Curtis Jones is what I would call a loose player. He's a guy who's just kind of all arms and legs, and those guys tend to not be just solid. You take the ball and you rip it through and you drive and you're constantly in possession. Yogi Ferrell was the ultimate solid player. Like when he would rip the ball through and drive, there was no looseness about his game. You could not take that ball away from him. And I feel like Curtis kind of holds the ball out a little far. He's not, when he's in possession, he doesn't feel like he's in tight possession of the basketball. It feels like it's kind of loose, and his shot, a tight player like Yogi, the shot's the same every time. Every time he pulls up, his motion is the same, the shot's the same, everything about that. Marshall Strickland back in the day, speaking of that, Duke game, was a very tight player. He was a guy that always repeated his motions all the time, was always in command when he had it. And Curtis just feels loose with the ball. And I think putting on weight can help a guy with that, and maybe being stronger, and maybe, getting tougher and things like that. The talent is there with Curtis. There's no question about that. It's consistency and just being stronger in every aspect, whether it's defensively, from his body to also, his ability to shoot the ball better and stronger on the ball. So those are things that I certainly agree with as far as Curtis Jones goes. And I was encouraged to see that after a really rough first, freshman season, he stayed on campus as well and is getting that one-on-one work with the coaches.
Man, we're only in the second segment. We've already had a Marshall Strickland reference and an Earl Callaway reference. We're going deep tonight.
Hey, man, two great Indiana players. Can't deny those guys.
Absolutely. All right, you are listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Jared Morris here with Ryan Phillips. Ryan, the other big news, we already mentioned it, Thad Matta fired at Ohio State. So Archie Miller will already have seniority over at least one Big Ten coach heading into this season.
It's true.
So some turnover. Illinois now has Brad Underwood, which I think a lot of people thought was a good choice.
Mm-hmm.
In Ohio State, as soon as Matta was fired, you heard all kinds of crazy names being bandied about as possible candidates as you roll your eyes. And I think, I kind of did the same thing. But now, we're to the point where, Fred Hoiberg had been talked about. McDermott apparently interviewed and, maybe didn't want the job or it wasn't offered. Who knows? Like you said, Chris Mack, I think he's no longer a candidate. So, who are we looking at now? Like maybe Chris Holtman. Do you have any insight on who it might be?
Well, I was on with Kent Sterling talking about that this week, and Chris Holtman will be a great choice. I think that, quite frankly, I know it stinks to say this about an in-state rival, but he's done as good a job coaching over the last 3 years as anybody in the country, considering what he walked into Butler with and what he's produced the last few years. He's done a fantastic job. He really has. But I will say about Butler, that is one of those places where guys who take that job absolutely love it, and they can usually pay their coaches pretty well. There's some money in the program, not to the level of Ohio State, but guys are usually pretty content there. It's kind of a special place that really sucks people in. And it's a really, it's something we think of as a much smaller program, but there is a tradition there now, and guys just seem to love it there. So I don't know if he's going to be willing to leave, especially this late in the process. That's part of this problem, is that they're starting so late that you almost have to start looking at NBA guys, because the college guys are well into their offseason program, and it's going to be really interesting to see somebody jump out of it.
I know one coach who's not well into an offseason program.
Yeah, no, he's already getting paid. I don't think that Tom Crean is gonna jump anywhere in the Big Ten. That's just my feeling. I think that Tom really wants a year off, just based on some of his comments. I think he's gonna enjoy doing some TV work or whatever he winds up doing. But I think that he's going to want to take a year off, let his family kind of settle down and figure something out. As for Matta, though, I think obviously there's some health issues there, but this just feels like he was forced out because of that. Maybe there wasn't a long-term commitment that he could make because of those issues. This really is a "what have you done for me lately" business. It just is. And that's never more clear than seeing Thad Matta, the all-time winningest coach at Ohio State, who's had 2 bad years. They happen to come in the last 2 years and be back-to-back. But other than that, he's had a fantastic track record of success there, and now he's gone. And that's really surprising that they were able to let him go after 2 admittedly rough years. That was really shocking to me that he didn't get to go out on his own terms, considering what he's done for that program.
And with that, we have now covered the Thad modifier at Ohio State basketball more than all Ohio State blogs and podcasts combined as they focus on football.
Seriously. Can Urban Meyer coach both? Is that how that works?
Probably. I think he could. All right. Stick with us. Coming up, you all sent in a bunch of questions, so we wanted to save some extra time for our Twitter Q&A segment, so we got a lot of time for it. Stick with us because that is going to be a fun question. We will do that next on the Assembly Call. All right. Let me listen to that real quick. Okay, we're good. So our first segment was 16 minutes and 6 seconds. 16:06. And that one clocked in at a cool 10:58. So we are in good shape. We got lots of time to answer questions because we're at 27:04.
Why couldn't you go on last week? You were sick?
Dude, I was sick. I don't know what happened. Like, I felt fine early in the day, and then like about noon, 1 o'clock, I started feeling terrible. And I ended up, I sent a tweet that just said I can't do it, and I was in bed at 6 o'clock.
What'd they do on the radio? They just run an old show? Or?
Yeah, they ran the previous week's show. I didn't get any like angry tweets like, hey, you guys are talking about the same thing that you talked about last week. Which
we have no
either means that people didn't listen to the previous show, or I mean, the stuff was still pretty relevant. It's not like a lot had happened.
I mean, off-season stuff all seems to be pretty relevant week to week.
Yeah. Okay, so let me just check. Wow, there's a really good chat going on. This is awesome to see, guys.
On YouTube or?
Yeah, on the YouTube chat.
Where are the questions? Do you have them posted?
Yeah, they're in here. So just scroll down.
Oh, okay, there it is.
Under segment 3.
I saw a big.
So we'll go through these. I mean, some of them we don't need to linger on for a long time, but.
Ethan.
Don't give away. Don't give it away. I shouldn't have even put it there. I wanted to get okay, but I know. But
in all of college basketball, Jared.
Okay, well we'll get to that. We'll get to that. I'll be interested when we get to that question. So for those of you watching on YouTube, one of the questions is from Eric. If you could pick one player in college basketball to add to IU's roster this season, who would it be? I mean, I figured we need a center, right?
Let's thin that down to Big Ten. Can we do that?
We can do whatever we want.
Let's say in the Big Ten, because I think that's more interesting
Okay.
than just because college basketball, that's so wide. There's so many people. So
basically, it's between Miles Bridges and Ethan Happ.
You could go with Wagner.
No.
Vince Edwards.
Vince Edwards is good, but no, not over those two guys.
Bryant McIntosh.
No, I mean, no. If you're not going to go for the center, then you go for Bridges because he's the best non-center. It's obvious. So you either go for the center.
I mean, I'm going with Bridges, but it's
yeah, but that's just because you hate Ethan Happ. That's not because of objective criteria.
Travels every time he catches the ball. So
yeah, but then he'd be traveling for us.
I don't care.
All right,
let me see if there's anyone out there that I would like to have real quick. Let me just look.
What do you guys say in the chat? Give us any ideas. Are there any? You could add any player from the Big Ten to Indiana.
Yeah, you know what? I'm
going
to take Miles Bridges.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of have to.
Especially because I think he and Davis could play together.
Yeah. Yeah, he might actually even be a better answer than.
You can stretch him out.
He's the best player. You really should just. Yeah. It's not like Indiana's loaded at every position this year.
Yeah. You could stretch him out to a stretch 4 too, and let Davis work the inside. Or if Davis gets in the foul trouble, you move him. Yeah. I'm doing Miles Bridges.
All right. Well,
great question.
It is a really good question.
Oh no.
What?
Oh, okay. I thought that was Dempsey. It wasn't. Dempsey needs 1 goal to break Landon Donovan's record, and somebody just hit the post, and I thought it was Dempsey. It wasn't.
Okay, let's get started with segment 3. Ready? Okay, here we go. You're listening to the Assembly Call. Remember to go to assemblycall.com/join to activate your free membership. You will get our weekly 6-Banner Saturday news roundup delivered right to your inbox each Saturday morning. I've actually been doing those on Sunday. It's a little bit easier to manage. So 6-Banner Sunday, I don't know if that's going to be a permanent change, but 6-Banner Saturday or Sunday. You'll get it one morning on the weekend.
It'll be the 6-Banner weekend.
6-Banner weekend. So that'll help you stay up to date with your Hoosier news during the off season, and we'll continue doing it once the season begins. Again, that URL, assemblycall.com/join. I'm Jared Morris, talking IU basketball here with my co-host on the Assembly Call, Ryan Phillips. Remember, you can join us after every IU basketball game over at assemblycall.com and every week right here on Assembly Call Radio. All right, it is time for our Twitter Q&A. You all sent us in a bunch of questions via Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @AssemblyCall, so make sure you're following us on there. If you're not, it's a great way to interact with the show and send us questions. We got a bunch of them, so let's start going through these, Ryan. This question from Andrew: what is your projected record for these marquee non-conference games for Indiana, and does the fan base get upset if we don't win any of them? So as of right now, we don't know the full non-conference schedule, but we do know that Indiana will be playing against Duke. We know that they will play at Seton Hall in the Gavitt games, and that's a good Seton Hall team that will probably be a top 25 team. Indiana will be at Louisville, so that game is at Louisville. That's a true road game. And then against Notre Dame in the Crossroads Classic. So 4 really meaty, solid, good non-conference games for Indiana. What is your projected record? Obviously not knowing who's going to be playing, what injuries may be, anything else about those games, just off the top of your head. How do you think Indiana does?
You go first, man. This is you. I want you to go first.
So I think Indiana's going to beat Duke. I think we're going to win at home. I think the atmosphere is going to be crazy. I don't think Indiana will win at Louisville. The Notre Dame game, to me, I think that's a game Indiana wins. I haven't looked a lot at Notre Dame, but I just feel like that's another kind of in-state statement game that'll be important. And I want to say that Indiana will win at Seton Hall. For some reason, I keep thinking of that game like the NC State game in the 2011-12 season, like this early season road game that, Indiana's not expected to win, and they do. But that Seton Hall team, obviously better than what that NC State team was. And so I think that's probably going to be a difficult test on the road that early for that team. So I think Indiana goes 2-2. And I will say, does the fan base get upset if we don't win any? I don't think anybody.
You said the other. So you don't think they'll win at Seton Hall?
No, I don't think they'll win at Seton Hall. Sorry, I've been kind of trying to talk myself into it, but I think those, getting a win at Seton Hall or at Louisville would be tough. Does the fan base get upset if we don't win any? I think the fan base would be disappointed, but I don't think anybody would be upset unless we just go and get our doors blown off. And, as long as we play hard, and that's something else Archie Miller said at Huber's Winery is, a lot can go wrong for this team, but the one thing that won't is we will play hard. And no matter what, as Indiana fans will be able to look up with pride and say our team, played hard. And I believe them. I think Indiana will. So I think that win or lose, we'll play well in those games. But to me, I think 2-2. But I think it's still, as long as Indiana's playing well, I don't think anybody will get too upset if we compete but don't win them. Disappointed, but not upset.
I'm going to go ahead and say I think they win the Notre Dame game. I think Seton Hall on the road is a toss-up. I would lean no because Seton Hall is a pretty experienced team and they're playing at home, like a true home game, not, in their town home game. They're going to be that comfortable on their own floor. So I lean no on that, but I think that's kind of a toss-up as well. The Louisville game, I think, is a loss. No question. I think that's a loss. Rick Pitino is going to have some good players coming back, as always, and they're very tough at home any time of the year, especially early. And then I think the Duke game, again, for me, the Duke game is a toss-up just because of the atmosphere, the energy. This group has always played well as an underdog. So I would lean towards Duke being a toss-up that they could win. I'm not going to go say I'm predicting them to beat Duke. I'm putting it on the line as a toss-up, leaning towards a win. But Notre Dame, I think they will beat.
I'm not hedging. Indiana will beat Duke. I'm saying
fine.
It right now.
Indiana will beat Duke.
There we go.
You're gonna have to clip that out and just play it as one of our drops, like one of our soundbite drops if they get blown out.
They won't. That's not happening again.
Yeah, no, it won't. But so I say 2-2 as well with the same. I have the same picks. But again, I think that Duke game is going to be it's going to really depend on who's healthy. Everybody. We're assuming everybody's healthy going into that game. It's a normal progression for the team. In a coach's first year, and I don't think that the fan base will be angry if they don't win any of them. Again, like you said, I think it's going to depend on how they play, how they show up. Are they going to fight, or are they just going to kind of get behind and roll over? I don't think that's what we should expect from these guys, but you got to see it. But in a coach's first year, your expectations should be muted because he's got to put that system in. He's got to do this. By the end of the year, You judge how the team is playing. You judge them by that because it's going to take a while. It takes a while. You see that in every sport. When a coach comes in, for the most part, and there are very rare circumstances where this isn't the case, it takes a while to implement everything. It takes a while to get the players out of their old habits into their new habits and playing a different way. So obviously expectations should be sort of, hey, we're going to be competitive. We're going to be a good team, but this isn't about this year. I mean, you want to win this year, but this is about the next 10 years when you hire a coach. It's not about who's going to get us to win now. This is about the next decade of basketball in Indiana. So, hopefully they come out and play well. I hope the fan base is understanding because it is a first year.
So speaking of the next decade of Indiana basketball, Hoosier in Chapel Hill asks, when Tom Izzo retires, will IU become the premier program in the Big Ten? It's a good question. I mean, obviously, no longer is Bo Ryan at Wisconsin, Thad Matta out at Ohio State. I think, when you look at programs that obviously have some stability outside of Michigan State, Michigan has been pretty good under John Beilein. Minnesota has kind of been an ascendant team just for the last year under Richard Pitino, but can that really sustain? Is Northwestern going to keep it up under Chris Collins? I think Indiana is very well positioned with Archie Miller and with just the built-in resources of the program to be the premier program in the Big Ten. And I will say that's that's what my expectation is. And I think that's what Archie Miller's expectation is. And I don't think that's an unfair one. Obviously, what Tom Izzo has done at Michigan State is remarkable. And I think it's a great model for, what Indiana can be. But I think Indiana is very well positioned given some of the coaches that have left and given what Indiana has now to be that team that takes over the Big Ten once Tom Izzo retires.
Look, I know results haven't been what they were, and what we expect, but who said Indiana isn't the premier program in the Big Ten? I mean, is there a program that if you were starting today, no coaches anywhere, let's say all the coaching jobs are vacant, where is the job that everybody would want to go to?
Well, sure.
It's Indiana.
But we just haven't it's been about getting the perfect fit and who has the coach who can maximize the program.
But who has had the better track record lately? Of course, Michigan State is the top program right now. But again, if you're talking strictly about the program and the history and the premier program, the program that everybody wants to go to, again, take the coaches away and just look at the resources of the programs and look at the history and look at the tradition and look at the fan base and all of that stuff. Indiana is the premier program in the Big Ten. They may not win as regularly as they should have. And again, it's been about, as you said, getting the right coach to develop some kind of consistency over a long period of time. And that's what Archie Miller was brought in to do. So will they become the premier program? I don't even think they may wait till Izzo is done. If the right coach is there, Indiana will surpass everybody because of the resources, the built-in, they recruit Indiana. They can recruit from the state of Indiana. They can do all of these different things that other schools do not have an advantage, don't have that kind of advantage. So it's almost like cheating. I mean, you get a big boost when you come into Indiana because you are so far ahead of everybody else in resources, in fan, support, all that stuff. So I would say that I don't believe it will. I don't believe IU is not the premier program. They just haven't had the results that would be commensurate with that lately.
I like it. All right, you're listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Jared Morris here with Ryan Phillips, answering the questions that you sent us via Twitter. Ryan, let's go to Eric's question. And so Eric asked us, if you could pick one player in college basketball to add to IU's roster this season, who would it be? And we were talking between segments that we should make this one player in the Big Ten to add to IU's roster. And
just to cut down on the,
Yeah, but as I think about it more, I'm not sure that it would change my answer because I think the top two guys that I would have picked are both in the Big Ten. The guy that I chose, and I chose this for two reasons. One, I chose this guy because obviously Indiana has a hole down low. I mean, we have Deron Davis, but not a lot of depth behind him. And this is obviously a guy that has tormented Indiana, so it would be nice to not have to play him. That would be an added bonus of getting him. But that is Ethan Happ. And the second reason that I chose him is just because I knew that it would kind of set you off. And I want to see that face that you make when talking about Ethan Happ and his incessant traveling.
Yeah, you mean the fact that he travels every time he gets the ball? Yeah.
Yes, and he does, but that would help Indiana kind of shore up their lack of depth down low, would give you a little bit of insurance against injury. If a guy like Juwan Morgan gets hurt, gives you a little bit of depth. But I think you made a good point, and I may actually already be wavering on my choice and ready to side with the choice that you made. Because while I think that it is important, to kind of fill a hole like that, I also think you should probably just take the best player. This Indiana roster isn't so stacked that you wouldn't just take the best player, and that is probably. Do you want to give us your?
Miles Bridges is the guy I would take. And I think, by the way, before I get into my talk about it, I just want to say I think that's as close as Jared will ever come to saying, hey, Ryan, you were right. But
yes,
but I would take Miles Bridges because while Indiana does have needs in the post, you've got Deron Davis to start at center. You can move Bridges out. He's skilled enough to play at a stretch 4 kind of position. He can shoot the 3. He can move around the floor. And then if Davis were to get in foul trouble, he could take that post role, over. Then you spread everybody else out on the perimeter. Indiana's done that plenty of times. Put Juwan Morgan out there, Colin Hartman, whoever, as that sort of inside-outside presence. So I think that it would fit best with the roster for Bridges. Not only is Bridges the best player in the conference, I think, but he, again, fits really what they're trying to do. I feel like Hap is a back-to-the-basket guy at all times, and that kind of conflicts with what Davis would do. Now, if you get Hap, great, you figure it out. You roll with it and figure it out. But I think that Miles Bridges would be the guy you'd want to add to this roster specifically because I think that he's so much more versatile and can do many more things for you, and I think he's a better defender than Hap is.
Yeah, I agree.
See, there you go.
I agree. Brian Tonsoni in the chat said Bryant McIntosh, his favorite non-IU player in the Big Ten.
Honestly, I love Bryant McIntosh. I love how he plays. I just think that we've got a lot of guards already, but I certainly can't argue that choice. I think the guard depth at Indiana is one of the strong suits, though. So I think that's what holds that back a little bit. But Brian, I mean, that's a great call.
So here's an interesting question from Jeff. With new recruits joining the team next week, so Al Durham, Clifton Moore, Justin Smith, they will be on campus. What would each of them have to do to have a successful summer? And it's an interesting question because, we don't always get we haven't always gotten a whole lot of insight, into what guys are doing in the offseason. But now we're getting a lot more, with social media and just with some of the behind-the-scenes stuff that we see. So to me, I think this is a pretty easy answer, which is they need to get in and get working physically with Cliff Marshall and get their conditioning, get their strength to where they're going to be able to play at the next level, because that's going to be the biggest adjustment for them based on, I'm obviously not speaking from experience, but based on everything I've heard, and I'm sure they know this, just the speed of the game, the size of the game, the strength of the game. And so whatever they can do to physically get themselves ready, obviously once practice starts and once Indiana starts installing their offense and their defense, they're going to have to get up to speed mentally. But the more that they can get themselves in shape physically and ready for the rigors, ready for the grind, then I think the more into it they'll be able to be mentally. Because obviously, as we know, when you get tired, that your ability to focus and your ability to pay attention to detail isn't always there. And for young guys, they struggle with that a lot of times anyway. So the more that they can get themselves physically ready for the season, I think is probably the best thing that they can do this summer. What would you say for the new guys coming in?
Well, if you want to go player by player, I think Al Durham obviously needs to work on his shot. I agree with you. The physicality, getting into the gym, I think that's a given. Clifton Moore needs to eat like 3 steaks a day. Justin Smith needs to just round out his game. I think maybe again add some more strength. He's a super athletic guy. Work on your jumper, do things like that, because that work on the things that'll get you into a game. And I think developing his jump shot will really help him because he's already athletic enough to play. Clifton Moore definitely just size, man. He's got to add some weight. He is such a skinny kid. I love his skill level. I love his length, all that stuff. But he just has to add weight, and it's
he's going to have to play some next year.
He probably will, yeah. And you just can't be out there and getting pushed around. And so it's kind of like the Curtis Jones thing. He needs to be a more solid player in many ways across the board with strength and toughness and things like that. I don't question his toughness. I think it's there, but he's got to be strong enough to back it up. And Durham, I think, it's a jumper. It's his jumper. He needs to work on that. He's a tough, hard-nosed guard, but he needs to be able to hit shots from the outside. So those are the 3 things I think each guy needs to work on.
That's good. That's good. All right, a few quick hit questions here to round out. We've gotten this question a few times, so I want to address it. Eric wonders, if you could only get one, would you rather get Romeo Langford or Keon Brooks?
Langford. I think he's the the next big thing.
And he may only be there for 1 year. I mean, to be fair, Keon Brooks could be a one and done guy too. So you could make an argument, that maybe you'd want the guy that could be there longer. But I think just what it would represent to get Romeo, and I'm not saying it's likely, but I think that the signal that would send would be just tremendous.
Yeah, I think that's the issue there, is that going down to Southern Indiana and snagging a player like that, going into that area and snagging a guy is a huge deal, especially when it looks like you're going up against Duke. And, some other schools obviously are in the mix as well, but if you can go beat them in your first year as a recruiter for Archie Miller, that's a big deal. And so I would say Romeo Langford. I think he's a program changing kind of recruit as far as I've seen.
All right, last question for you. This is from Seth. Who would win 5-on-5? 5 Yogis or 5 Codys?
Jeez. I mean, that's a deep philosophical question. You've got to really you got to really worry about. I would say
just visualize that. I like that question. Just the visual. It's really entertaining.
You may think this is a joke. It's not a joke. I've pondered this before many times. Does the winner get 5 Oladipos or?
Ooh, yes.
I would say I would give it to 5 Codys because because of the versatility, and offensively, all 5 Codys could just back down the shorter Yogis. And rim protection is a big deal there as well. So I would go with 5 Codys. Now, if the winner gets 5 Oladipos, I'm taking Oladipo. I'm taking the Oladipo.
I'm taking Oladipo.
More versatility there. So I'm saying 5 Codys would beat 5 Yogis. Man. Although it's hard. That's hard for me to say, but you know my love for Yogi.
I do know your love for Yogi. Okay, well, you just mentioned Victor Oladipo. So speaking of Victor Oladipo, I had a chance to interview Victor this past week. I'll tell you what the biggest highlight was from what Victor said in that interview. And then we're going to talk about our IU interview bucket list, which should make for a fun final segment. Stick with us on the Assembly Call. All right. So that was 1751, which puts us at 44:55. Very nice.
So what do we have, 6 minutes?
We have 5 minutes and 5 seconds, which means we actually have 4 minutes and 29 seconds. That's usually about what we do for our final segment.
Yeah, I mean, you can pretty much just do your Oladipo thing, and
I want to know who people that you'd want to interview.
I'm going to say Dan Dockage because he's a big fan of the show.
Oh, geez. Oh, man.
Is this living or dead, or is this just people we could actually get? It's just people we could actually get. We'll say.
Yeah, that. I mean, see, when I put my bucket list together, I was thinking living or dead, and so I had Bill Garrett and Branch McCracken on it because, I mean, I think to interview those guys and talk about the time that they were at Indiana would have been incredible.
Back in my day, the basket was actually a
those guys. Those guys have some stories to tell, though. I mean,
they've seen some things.
I mean, it's not going to surprise anybody that Calbert Chaney is number 1 on my list. And Greg Graham would be on the list, but I already interviewed him when I was over at Midwest Sports Fans. I did an interview with Greg Graham, so I already got to talk to him, or he would be
shocking that you interviewed Greg Graham.
Hey,
Jared.
He's a great player.
Hold on. I'm looking up some stats real quick. Indiana.
So let's see. Brian says Quinn. Who else? Who else would be on your guys' bucket list? IU interview bucket list. I got to find a way to get a hold of Calbert. I want to interview Calbert. Need to make that happen somehow.
Ooh, I know mine. I know one of mine.
Archie's definitely on the bucket list too. I want to interview Archie.
For sure.
By the way, that may happen. So there's a fun little nugget for the folks watching on YouTube. It could happen. I'm not saying it will, but there have been some conversations, so it could actually happen.
James Blackman Jr., 31st all-time in scoring.
Wow.
Indiana. How funny is it that Tom Van Arsdale and Dick Van Arsdale are 32nd and 33rd and apart by 2 points?
Yeah, it's perfect. That's how it should be. Let's see. Mr. Highlights Official says Steve Alford. That's Ryan's. That's 1 through 5 on his bucket list.
Steve Alford, the player? Sure, I would have interviewed him. Steve Alford now?
Did you know he was going to be IU's coach for a little while?
It was Jeff Goodman in his little tweet storm about me or whatever said, "Who is this guy?" And I wanted to snap back. The only guy nationally who said that the Indiana wouldn't even call Steve Alford. Oh, guess what? All right, you can start it. I think I've got a pretty good handle on it.
Okay, we can do it. We can do it. So 4:29 is when we got to be out of here.
Yep.
Okay, here we go. You're listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Jared Morris, talking IU basketball with Ryan Phillips, wrapping up another episode of Assembly Call Radio. So this past week was quite a fun one for me, as I had the opportunity to interview Victor Oladipo. He's got a camp coming up June 19th through the 23rd in Greenwood, and so obviously, you know, he wants to promote that camp, and so he gave us some time on Podcast on the Brink. We reran that episode here on the Assembly Call feed as well. So if you're listening to the podcast, you can go back one episode and hear that conversation with Victor. And my biggest takeaway from talking to him was what he said in response to my question about whether or not he thinks it's fair that Indiana fans are so quick to compare guys to him, you know, like an underrated recruit. Well, he could be the next Victor Oladipo, you know, a guy who's ready to make a jump from his sophomore to his junior year. He could be the next Victor Oladipo, you know, a swingman who's a really good athlete but needs to become a better shooter. He could become the next Victor Oladipo, and we're so quick to do that. And I wanted to know his thoughts on that. And he basically said that it wasn't fair. You know, it wasn't fair to hold guys to that standard of, you know, a guy who was, you know, the 144th recruit and became the number 2 pick in the draft. It doesn't happen that often. And, you know, he kind of started to go down that road with his answer, but then he kind of veered a little bit and said, you know, the guy that people should be, the guys that people should be comparing themselves to isn't Victor Oladipo anyway. It's Calbert Chaney and it's Isaiah Thomas, the best players at IU. Because as he said, those are the guys that he compared himself to. And so, you know, he was kind of quick to make that correction. I just thought that was a really interesting perspective, and I think it's something interesting for us to think about as, you know, observers of IU basketball and as fans. And, you know, it comes from a place of love. We loved watching Victor play, and we all love to see every player have that kind of growth and progression. But it is important to remember that Victor is Victor, and there were very special traits about him that allowed him to get to the place where he is. And so just because on the surface someone might look like they fit into the Victor Oladipo narrative, that is a very, very, very rare narrative, and I think we need to remember that when comparing people to him, how special of a player he was and how special of a story his was. So that was the best lesson for me. But obviously, interviewing Victor, that was a big name on my IU interview bucket list that I was able to cross off, and it got me thinking about, you know, who else is out there that would be at the top of my bucket list for people to interview. And so, Ryan, I want to get your thoughts on this as well. We got a couple minutes left, but, you know, real quick, it won't surprise anybody to know that Calbert Chaney is at the top of my IU interview bucket list. Greg Graham would be there, but I've already interviewed him before, so he's not on there. If we could do anyone, you know, living, dead, I would certainly want to interview Bill Garrett and Branch McCracken, 2 giants in the history of IU basketball. And then a couple of other names that are interesting. I think Jay Edwards would be really interesting to interview because, you know, that run that they went on in 1989 was so much fun, and that he was really the first IU player that I fell in love with as a young kid watching games, and just to hear how things went for him after he left IU. And then, of course, Ivan Renko, because, I mean, if you're the guy to get the Ivan Renko interview, that would just be second to none. What about you, Ryan? And by the way, we want to know who's on your IU interview bucket list. So send us a tweet at Assembly Call. Who's on your bucket list, Ryan?
Well, I would say Damon Bailey, but I've interviewed him several times when he was a high school coach in Bedford. I got a chance to sit down with him, you know, a number of times, and good guy, but it wasn't. I don't think that would be as effusive an interview as I think that I would love to get. Yogi Ferrell is one because we've talked about him so much on this show, and we happen to know his mom. So come on, Doc Libby, you know, pony up, get the kid on here.
Yogi, you're welcome anytime.
Dan Dockish, because he's such a big fan of our show, would be a great one. Christian Watford would be a good one too. I want to talk about the shot extensively. And then I think the Van Arsdale brothers would be really interesting. They're still alive. They're 74. 2 guys who grew up together as twins, played together at Indiana, went to the NBA, were both on the all-rookie team for different teams. It was the first time they played apart. You know, Dick Van Arsdale's number is retired, and Tom Van Arsdale, you know, was a very successful player. So I think that would be really fun.
All very good choices. That's fun. So let us know what your choices are. And that will do it for us on this week's episode of the Assembly Call. If you want to see us do the show live and be part of the live chat, join us at assemblycall.com on Thursday nights for the live simulcast of our Assembly Call recording. Or you can always subscribe to our podcast by searching for Assembly Call wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to go to assemblycall.com/join to activate your free Assembly Call membership. Thank you for listening. We will be back to talk IU hoops again with you next week. Until then, keep your elbows in and your eyes on the rim, and go Hoosiers. Perfect. So, real quick, someone mentioned here, Bob Knight's kind of an obvious name to have on the bucket list.
We know that's not going to happen. So,
well, it's just, obviously there's a part of any IU fan that would love to interview Bob Knight, but I feel like at this point I kind of know what he would say.
Yeah.
I don't know that the kind of questions I would want to ask him, he'd be that interested in answering. Yeah. And so he's actually not on the bucket list right now because there's a lot of guys I would rather talk to than him. Which is kind of sad to say, but that's kind of how I feel about it.
Anytime Bob Knight talks, he's going to talk about what Bob Knight wants to talk about. And that's not what an interview is supposed to be. It's supposed to be you asking a question, maybe possibly sometimes challenging someone, though not in an aggressive way, but, challenging, them with tough questions. And I feel like every interview Bob Knight gives, he's just getting softballs. And, that's not what you want to do when you're interviewing somebody. So you want to actually ask him some good questions. And another guy I would think of is Kent Benson. He was number 1 overall pick.
Kent Benson would be interesting.
Hold on. I can shut Skype off, right? We're done with that. You're echoing. I turned the volume back.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you can shut Skype off. Kent Benson would be interesting. Scott May would be an interesting interview. Anybody from that era really would be.
Scott, with Benson, he was a guy, I think that he is elevated over that team. They went undefeated, obviously, which is part of the interest in interviewing those guys. But he also was the most outstanding player of the Final Four, number 1 pick in the draft, didn't have a successful career as people thought he would. But it's so weird for me with the Van Arsdale brothers because they both averaged over 15 points a game in the NBA, and they played together growing up, obviously they're twins. They played together their entire time. And then to get drafted by separate franchises and go to separate places, I just want to know what that's like. You basically it'd be like losing your right arm, and having to really do that. So I think that'd be interesting. A guy like Walt Bellamy would have been fascinating.
Anybody from those teams too, because I think it was the 60 team that did make the NCAA tournament, but was playing about as well as anybody. They just didn't win the Big Ten. Some people say
that 1960 team is the best Indiana team ever.
Yeah,
but the problem was they were playing against an Ohio State team that was just as good, if not better, and they lost to Ohio State once. And
but they killed them late in the season.
Exactly.
But they were just they
didn't win the Big Ten.
I know.
Yeah, they didn't win the Big Ten. So, but also Walt Bellamy, another guy, number 1 overall pick. He was on the Olympic team that went to Rome, that famous Olympic team that had, I can't remember all the guys, but it was, let me see. Medalist. There we go. You've got Jerry Lucas, Oscar Robertson, Jerry West, Walt Bellamy, Terry Dissinger, and they were coached
little squad.
And they were coached by Pete Newell, I believe. So, that's just an unbelievable, just an unbelievable team. You'd love to see.
Yeah. Don Schlunt would obviously be great. Jimmy Rail, just to talk with someone who scored, 57 points twice. That'd be kind of crazy. So, yeah. That's the thing, man. With Indiana basketball, there are so many characters and so many important people. Everett Dean would be great. The first, coach. He kind of built the early foundation for Indiana basketball. For sure. So, there's so many interviews. So, if you know any of these people and they would like to talk about their IU basketball experience, let us know because we'd love to talk with them and share their story.
Also, I think it's funny about that 1960 team. I forgot to mention it. The 2 players on that team, well, there were 3 that are notable, but 2 of them were Jerry Lucas and John Havlicek were on the same team. And then the third guy who was off the bench was was Bobby Knight.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Mark Titus.
Yeah, no. So yeah, that would be an interesting interview just to talk about that, talk about meeting Muhammad Ali at the Olympics, all that stuff, because that was the Muhammad. Folks, if you like sports, I will say this to all those watching, and I say this to you too, Jared. If you like sports, read the book Rome 1960 by David Moranis. It is one of the most fascinating books I've ever read. It's about the U.S. Olympic team and just the Russian Olympic team too at the Olympics in Rome in 1960, and about all the espionage and everything going on behind the scenes. But it's also about just an unbelievable, one of the greatest U.S. Olympic teams of all time. Just the amount of famous people who were on that team were incredible. So really interesting book. Pick it up. It's fantastic.
Awesome. All righty. Well, thank you everybody for being here. We will be back next week with another brand new episode. I'm not sure who's hosting next week. I think it may be us again. I think Andy's out. I'm not sure if Zach's here, so we may be doing this again, you and me.
All right, sounds good to me.
If you can handle that.
Yeah, well, I'll get through it.
All right, everybody. Send us questions on Twitter, and we will talk to you next week.